So last time we talked about energy in ecosystems. Well then, how does energy move in ecosystems? It flows through food chains. Wait a second. Think about an insect. It's just any random insect in a forest. How many creatures do you think would eat that insect? Or would like to eat that insect? For some insects, usually the more poisonous ones, very few. But for other insects, many creatures would like to eat the insect, right? Or for a mouse. How many creatures? Oh, foxes, coyotes, weasels, lots of things like to eat mice or squirrels. I once saw a hawk eating a squirrel at Penn, and it was basically in the front yard of my dorm. I will not display the photo here because some people may be disturbed. As far as the hawk looked, it seemed very delicious, and the bird was about this big. And while we were watching it eat, it just kept eating, occasionally looking around at us, making sure we weren't about to try anything. So it's not displayed here because of goriness. So what was a hawk's ecological niche? Well, an ecological niche, usually we say it's a role that an organism serves in its ecosystem, but the problem is that organisms do not serve roles. They just do whatever they can to survive and reproduce as much as they can. This role is what happens in the end. Oh, the hawk happens to be a top-level predator, which eats this creature, this creature, this creature. It nests in this place, that place, whatever. Described places. But it doesn't actually play a role. What it does is do its best to survive and reproduce. So this role thing is just kind of a way to think. What does it do? What eats it? And of course, what does it eat? Technically, what does it do includes both of these two. Eat. And then, where does it nest? When does it nest? Well, if it nests. Well, let's be more general. Where does it live? So pigeons would have an ecological niche of eating seeds. A pigeon is a pheasant-like bird. Surely you have seen pigeons. But if you haven't, think of a pheasant-like bird. By the way, chickens originated with a type of pheasant. And that's spelled this. Pheasant. So these are birds that walk around on the ground and eat food. Well, usually by pecking. They also exhibit many other behaviors such as ground nesting, which I'm sure you have known chickens to do. And they are a very diverse group and quite successful. Partly because, yes, they are fat and delicious, but they are capable of inflicting considerable damage on predators. A chicken, for example, or red jungle fowl, as the ancestors were called, it is capable of being used in cage fighting against other chickens, of course. And these are mostly males that are good for cage fighting because they have big spurs, which are really sharp on their heels. So a predator going for a chicken could take a lot of damage. It's not worth the time, often. Hence, pheasants are a remarkably successful group. Oh yeah, they are also very well camouflaged for the most part. The only reason chickens that, as we know them, the red jungle fowl, are so brightly colored is because the ones that we really take notice of are the males. The females are usually dull and brownish and well camouflaged against the forest floor. You might be thinking, hey, does this go for peacocks as well? Yes, peacock females are brownish and well camouflaged against the forest floor. It's the males that have those huge tails that partially function as a, hey, I have this huge tail that's dragging me down, but I'm still alive, therefore I must be really good. I must have really good genes. Yes, I do realize it's a bit of a foolish way to advertise when you think about it, but evolutionarily, it worked. Because if you have a tail that huge and you're still alive, then you must have good enough genes to overcome it, right? Maybe it might be good to breed with that male. Now, we know that ecological niches vary. Like some of them, oh, grass has an ecological niche. Yeah, that's going to be a very different niche than, say, the grasshoppers that eat that grass, right? Why? Because one of them is a producer and the next one is a consumer. So, we have a food chain. Grass, say, suppose we use grass. Grass, grasshopper. Be patient, young grasshopper. I believe that's something like what the line is supposed to be. And then many creatures can go here. So, what does it mean when it has many options? Well, then we have a food web. And also, things may cross over. For example, some other type of grass-eating insect. Or alternatively, cow, human. Humans can eat grasshoppers. They are quite nutritious. Now, grasshoppers can, for example, feed mice. And mice can feed humans. Of course, there are other types of creatures that might seem a little bit more culturally palatable. For example, guinea pigs. They can be bred for food. And indeed, the reason they're called guinea pigs is because they were bred for food. Surprising, isn't it? So a food chain is a sequence of organisms, each feeding one or more of the next level. And this shows how energy, in the form of chemical energy, and mass for that matter, is transferred between groups, or from one organism to another organism. So, why is it that not only energy is transferred, but also mass? It's because think about the food you eat. Some of that gets incorporated into your body, right? Or as a flab, depending on how much you exercise. So anyway, some of that gets incorporated. That's mass. This didn't just come out of nowhere. So some of the carbon was incorporated. And here, let's see a simple food chain in a forest ecosystem. Any of these levels can be eaten by humans. So it's not that easy to classify the trophic level, or level of consumer for that matter, in a food chain or a food web. The trophic level is dependent on its feeding position. So species can be divided. Here we have the first trophic level, the producers. Then we have the second trophic level, trophic. Some people get confused with this for a very simple reason. Third trophic level, fourth trophic level. Now you might think this is easy. Wait a second. Can't a mouse eat a ladybug? Whoa, so a mouse is both second and fourth trophic level. Well, yeah. Many organisms can be in many trophic levels at once. However, in addition to this, there is also the fact that the first one is producer. So the second trophic level is the first consumer, right? And then we have the second consumer and the third consumer. So we call this primary consumer. Note how second trophic level is primary consumer, whereas this is secondary consumer, often written as secondary consumer. Well, okay, let's write it in anyway. Consumer. All right. Do you see why people sometimes get confused? Don't. Make sure you remember that the producer is the first trophic level, the first place where an energy, or mass for that matter, biomass, enters a food web, and that the primary consumer is the first consumer, not the first trophic level. They're different. So here we have a hypothetical food web, or part of a food web, of the boreal forest. Why is it part of a food web? We're missing many creatures. For example, where are wolves, or moose, or deer? Well, they're not here. So, squirrels eat parts of pine trees. Well, squirrels eat parts of pine trees. They also eat parts of blueberry bushes. Snowshoe hares eat wild grasses. They can eat any of these can eat shoots of aspen trees. So, sure. Squirrels get eaten by weasels. Weasels can get eaten by great horned owls, or they can get eaten by goshawks, which can get eaten by great horned owls. Hares and weasels can both get eaten by lynx. And depending on age of lynx, it might be eaten by an owl, if it's particularly young. And of course, squirrels get eaten by lynxes as well. It is often quite cumbersome to draw a food web because there are so many connections. This is why we usually only show partial food webs, or take one particular organism of interest and then study its interactions with other organisms instead of drawing the full food web and then studying the whole thing at once. Now I say usually we prefer not to study whole food webs because sometimes scientists have to. And of course, if you have to, better do it, otherwise you don't get paid, right? So here, we see that many organisms can belong to many different trophic levels. Of course, producers are usually just producers, or first level. For the ones that kind of upset it are, for example, the Venus flytraps that we talked about last session. So this is second trophic level, sure, second. This is second trophic level. Let's assign these. So these are all first trophic level. And this, well, wait, snowshoe hares can get eaten by weasels, so we point that as well. So this is third, sure. What about this? Well, we see that it's third, going from these two. It can also be fourth. Although technically it is possible for a great horned owl to go eat rabbits or hares and squirrels, usually they prefer slightly bigger prey. Well, I mean, adult owls prefer slightly bigger prey if possible. Of course, if there are lots of hares running around, why not, right? So prey preferences will vary. So this is both third And fourth if it eats a weasel. And fifth if it eats a goshawk, which is fourth. Please note that I do not guarantee I am pronouncing this properly. And I think we get the idea well enough that I don't need to draw things out for the lynx, which by the way is the same as a goshawk in terms of trophic levels. However, if we have a food web, which then gets interrupted by the presence of an invasive species which has few predators and eats all sorts of other things, well, then the invasive species can do quite a lot of damage. Why do you think a rusty crayfish can eat bass, which are big fish, or pickerel, which are also big fish? Well, it eats their eggs, and it eats everything else. Usually, for the most part, invasive species are generalists. They will eat just about anything, or can survive in very poor conditions, and also thrive in really rich conditions. For example, dandelions sure look pretty invasive. They grow everywhere. Purple loosestrife, kudzu, these are all invasive plant species. Dandelions seem invasive, but they're a bit more of a boundary case. Now, the rusty crayfish is originally from the Ohio River Valley. If you like, I can draw a map for you. So if this here is Lake Ontario, and this here is Lake Erie, and this here is Lake Huron, this is the North American Great Lakes. Now, the Huron is a little bit off. Ohio River Valley is somewhere around here. So they're originally from here, and then people introduced them into neighboring rivers. And they have since been doing quite a lot of damage to native crayfish species because they are aggressive, they grow quickly, and the other things are not familiar with them and don't like to eat them. So an ecological pyramid is a representation of energy, numbers, or biomass between trophic levels. Wait a second. Why don't we just have one type representing all of these? Let's think about this for a moment. If we have energy, we know that each level, they get energy from their food, they spend some of it, and then the next level only gets part of it when it eats them. So that means the energy has to shrink at every level. Typically, the transfer is about 40% for insects. Like when they eat plants, they get about 40%. When they eat detritus, as in the case for freshwater stream insects, when they eat the detritus on the stream floor, sometimes they get as low as only 10%. So that's 1/4. That's not good, right? Compared to the ideal for insects. Now, mammals typically get somewhere around 10%. The more active the animal, the less it gives to the next level, because it spends more of the energy itself. So, let's change this a little bit. Instead of red arrows, as is usually used for thermal energy, let's use some white arrows. Or just write heat. For some reason, the general convention for thermal energy is usually zigzags in red. But I think we'll be okay this way. Now, what happens if we try to draw a picture with numbers or biomass? Wait a second. We scrolled past something important, didn't we? Think about a forest. Trees. If we have a forest, how many caterpillars do you think are living in that forest compared to the number of trees? Clearly, if you're dealing with biomass, you might not think that something similar can happen as with numbers. Say we have numbers, trees. Okay, I know this should be much smaller, but trees, bugs. And maybe the bugs' predators are also like this, if the bugs happen to reproduce fast enough. Now let's push that a little bit further. If we have biomass and the turnover rate, as in the speed at which the population replenishes itself, is really fast for the producers, say we look at the English Channel or some other body of water. This is for numbers. So if we have the English Channel or some other body of water, we might have biomass that looks like this. So this is zooplankton. The phytoplankton reproduces so fast that they can sustain a larger standing crop of zooplankton. Biomass. Phytoplankton. All right. Well then, this is why we don't just use one type of pyramid to represent all situations, whether it be energy, biomass, or numbers. The only one that's going to always be consistent is the energy. Biomass depends on producer size for the most part. And numbers also depends on producer size. Biomass also depends on what else? Let's think about this for a second. Actually, numbers can look like this both with very large and very small producers. Think about this. Yes, we probably have more phytoplankton than zooplankton, but the turnover rate is so high that the phytoplankton biomass is smaller than zooplankton. Why then would it not be possible, in theory, to have it so that the numbers operate the same way? It's just the phytoplankton breeds so fast that even though the zooplankton are eating them as quickly as they can, there's still, well, you end up getting less phytoplankton than zooplankton, but still enough energy moving up the chain, because the phytoplankton still have the biggest energy per period time to keep the zooplankton alive. So, every species has to occupy a unique niche. Why is this? Imagine if two species have the same role, so to speak, in the environment. They would compete with each other. And they would compete until one of them goes extinct or they separate in roles. There are many ground finches in the Galapagos Islands. There are two species of ground finches where on some islands they occur together, on some islands they don't. Where they occur separately, they both look like this in terms of beak size. Beak. And then this is number of individuals. So both of them look like this on islands where they occur together. On islands where they occur apart. So what happens when they occur together? Well, initially, they overlap really closely. But then, because the ones on the edge don't have to compete as much, they can breed faster. So the ones on the edge don't have to compete as much, so they breed faster. And they have more children that survive. So they split up. This also happens in terms of phenotype, i.e. appearance. So there are some places where you take one type of bird and another type of bird and you can't tell them apart at all. In other places, they look very, very different. Why? In the places where you can't tell the birds apart, for the most part, that's because they don't occur together in those places. In other places, to make sure that, say, the females can tell which male is their species, these species have evolved to look completely different, even though they are the same species as the ones that look the same when they're not together. Feeding relationships can be represented by food chains at the simplest, food webs, and trophic levels. Trophic levels. The only problem with a trophic level is that you can't tell which of a lower trophic level interacts with and which of a higher one, except based on reasoning with body size and poison resistance in some cases. Energy is continuously being lost to the environment by all living organisms. Yes, we use it. We don't use it all to build new tissue. This is why eating a steak does not immediately add the same mass to your muscles. Higher trophic levels have less energy available to them because with every transfer, there's a reason people excrete solid waste. It's because we can't take up everything. And the same goes for energy as well as mass. So that's also a major loss of energy to the environment. Ecological pyramids can be used to display energy, number, and biomass relationships. Usually, these do in fact look like pyramids. However, if the producers are very large or very quick to reproduce, it may be possible to support a larger standing crop, i.e., amount that's just sitting there, of primary consumers. It may be actually even possible to continue this for another level, but that is typically quite rare. Because usually in nature, you have to be bigger than something to eat it. This is, of course, not true for, say, piranhas, but for the most part, this holds. That you need to be bigger, at least slightly, than something else to be able to defeat it and eat it. Now, of course, we all know that not even piranhas, insects versus trees is completely different. So this can be numbers or biomass. This can never be energy. Because the energy pyramid represents the energy flow per day or per amount of time through each level. If we're saying, oh, energy that's currently in this level, we use biomass. So this is all three. All right, so that's it for this section. We'll be seeing you later.